It's to the very core of the person. To be frank with you, acts of sin are just the result of the heart. It means a thief is not a thief because he steals, but he steals because he is a thief. Do you understand? I don't have the vocabulary. I don't know that any human being does to properly explain what sin is and how bad it is. If we knew it as we ought to know it, we wouldn't do the dumb things we do. We wouldn't think the world of psychology holds the answer if we understood how bad sin is. You see, the world hates the cross. And sadly, most of the church does too. The world hates it because it shows how awful that man is, and at the same time how good he isn't. If something so horrible, so absolutely horrible, that God would have to become man and would have to come down here and be born of the Virgin Mary, and it would take 4,000 years to do it, and would have to walk perfect as a son of the law for 33 and a half years and then die and offer up himself as a sacrifice. If it took all of that, well, then we ought to understand how awful sin is. You see, the world out there, they can accept a historical Jesus. They can accept a Jesus, let me change it, Jesus the miracle worker. They can accept that. Jesus a prophet, a priest, a king. They can accept all of that. The world has no problem with Jesus the good man. But Jesus, as a sacrifice on a cross, says that man, no matter what he does, cannot alleviate or ameliorate his condition. And the world hates the Christ of the cross. But do you get it? It has no problem with Jesus the healer, Jesus the good man, Jesus the miracle worker, Jesus even virgin born. But Jesus, the sacrifice on a cross, says that I'm a pretty bad individual. And I'm so bad I can't save myself. And the world can't buy that. But all who do, he gives them power to become the sons of God. He laid that bullock on that altar, cut it in pieces, poured 4 barrels of water 3 times. But before he did that, he dug a trench around the thing. Why did he do that? I'm sure there were many reasons why he did it, but one of the reasons he was saying everything outside of that trench is of man. And it's wicked and evil and ungodly. Even Elijah was outside the trench. Not Elijah. Yes, he knew God, but he was just as dependent on that altar as was Ahab. You didn't hear what I said. No, not one of you heard what I said. We think I belong to Family Worship Center, or I belong to First Assembly of God, I belong to First Baptist, and God is so sick and disgusted with what you belong to. You're just as dependent on that altar as the biggest drunk that stands in the biggest bar in Baton Rouge, Louisiana today. God doesn't give 2 bent pins what you belong to and how good you think you are and what you think this, and I'm a 3rd generation this, and I'm going to know you're 3rd generational depraved sinner who got saved not by what you did, but by what Jesus did. Elijah was just as dependent on that altar as Ahab was. I got a letter some time ago. The man was mad at me. Big news, the line is long. He said Abel was not in the same condition as Cain. I'll have you know. I wrote him back and said, sir, you're crazy. There's never been a human being who has ever been born that didn't have to come to the way of the altar. Abel needed that sacrifice. Why do you think he offered it, airhead? He needed it just as much as Cain. Cain wouldn't accept it, but he was just as much in need of the altar as Cain was. That turkey was thinking he was a member of First Assembly of God, so I'm all right. No, you're not. I won't tell you all the reason he wrote. But Elijah was just as dependent on that altar, despite being a prophet, despite being used of God, despite being called of God, despite being anointed by God, despite hearing from God, despite being closer to God than any man on the face of the earth of that day, was just as dependent on that altar as was the wicked Ahab. Now, do you really understand that? Do you really understand it? I know we nod our heads, and I'm not chiding you, but I don't think we really do. We think what we do merits us something. Despite trying not to believe that, we still do. I'm this and I'm that, and I'm go to church and I'm a member of the church and I love God, and all of that is true. But you're still just as much in need of the altar as a child molester, as a drug pusher. I don't mean you're not saved. You are saved. You are redeemed, but it's your dependency on the altar that gave it to you. The trench said everything outside is outside the altar and everything inside is mine. This is my prescribed order inside the trench. And you'd better put your faith what's inside that trench. It really means separation, but it really means separation from those who don't depend totally on the cross and those who do. You've got a choice. And he poured 4 barrels of water over it 3 times. That's 12 again. The water signified the Word of God. The Word of God is perfect. But this Word, if you try to divorce it from the cross, God won't honor it. That 12 barrels of water was poured over that victim on that altar, poured over it until it soaked everything. The Word is tied to the altar, and the altar is tied to the Word. The Word is based on the sacrifice of the altar, and the altar functions as the Word is applied to